In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to install the custom firmware Magic Lantern to your Canon 7D Mark I. We're going to need a few things before we begin, and one of those is a fully charged battery. When we're installing firmware to the camera, it's really important that we've got a full battery, because if that dies when you're in the middle of it, it could be kind of a bricked camera situation. So yeah, make sure you've got a fully charged camera. The second thing is that we need to make sure that we're on the right firmware for the 7D to accept Magic Lantern. The build we're using requires 2.0.3. So the first part of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to either upgrade or roll back your firmware to make sure that you're on 2.0.3. If you're already on 2.0.3, you may skip into the video to the point where I'm installing Magic Lantern. And the actual Magic Lantern build we're using is not the official build that's on the main website. It's one that I found on the forum, and there's a user there called Dfort, who's one of the developers, and he's made a custom build. And the reason we're using that is that it unlocks the ability to select what bit depth we want to shoot in. And this is great because 14 bits, maximum quality, but huge file sizes. 10-bit, not much noticeable difference in quality, but the file size is very, very much lower. So I think it's important that that you guys get the full flexibility of that. So we're going to be using the custom build. Now, unfortunately, Dfort's website is no longer active, but we can still download the files using the Wayback Machine, and there'll be a link in the description below for you to access that. So first job is to format the camera using the camera itself. Formatted. Cool. Let's turn the camera off. I'm going to take the compact flash card, put that into your reader, and then what we want to do, I'm going to put this link in the description. So on the EOS card website here, you want to download the Canon 7D Mark I firmware, and the version you're looking for is 2.0.3. So let's click that. Once that's downloaded, we want to extract the file because it's a zip. So let's right click, extract all, and then inside there'll just be this one file here. Right click, copy, and paste it to the root directory on the CF card. And then we can eject the card and put it back in the camera and power up. So once the camera's powered on again, hit menu and navigate to firmware, and you can see there we're on 2.0.6. I'm pressing OK there, and it says, do you want to update? And we can see the FIR file we've copied there, 203, so that's the right firmware. So we'll select that and then OK it again, and it will start to install the firmware. So don't press any buttons, don't turn it off until it's complete. So once that's installed, it should say you're on 2.0.3. Just check that in the Canon menu like you did before. And once you've confirmed that, we can power off the camera again, take the CF card out, put it in the computer, and we'll set about installing Magic Lantern. So this is where we're going to need our Wayback Machine. So let's just put in the URL there. And then we're going to have to use the 2020 image there. So we'll just click on that, and then that'll take us to Dfort's download page. And the exact build we need is this one here, 10 and 12-bit, LV State 2019 May 15, 7D 203. So that is the exact file we need there. So if we click that, we'll see it's going to give us this sort of page for a second. Just bear with it, and then we'll get our download. So put that anywhere you like, and then we need to extract it. Let's right click on that, extract the files. It's just these three here. Can get rid of that now. So we want to copy that onto the root of the compact flash card, like so. And then we can eject the card back into the camera. Then head to your menu, and just like we did before, we want to find the firmware. Press OK on that. Update firmware, yes. And then we'll see, with any luck, the Magic Lantern utility should come up. Magic Lantern install, there we go. That's what you want to see. So please restart your camera, it says here. So let's do that. And there we go, Magic Lantern is now installed. You'll know if it's all working because you'll get the Magic Lantern overlay there. So should look different to what you normally see on video. So we know that's working. I'm going to press the trash can button and that'll bring us into the Magic Lantern menu, and we want to head over to modules, right? So the modules we're going to need are Raw Tweak, MLV Sound, MLV Record and MLV Play. So we want all these loaded, 4 of them. Then what we're going to do is restart to load these in. So now we've activated those modules, we're going to press the trash can button and go to Movie, and you should see here we have the option for raw video. So we're going to turn that on. We're then going to press the Q button to go into the settings for raw video, and I'll show you how I have this set most of the time. So you can see at the top here resolution is set to 1920. Now I would recommend keeping it on 1920. There is a way that you can cheat and get a sort of 2K output from this camera, but it involves being zoomed in on the live view when you're recording. So your framing and your monitoring is a bit compromised there. So I would just keep it on 1920. You can see the actual resolution there is not quite 1080p, it's 1728 by 972. So the second option available is the aspect ratio, and you can see that currently we're on 16 by 9, but I'm going to show you a trick. If you press OK on it and scroll, you can see that there's quite a few aspect ratios available, and if we select 3 by 2, we're using the full width and height of the 3 by 2 sensor that's in the 7D. So we're actually going to gain 300 pixels over 16 by 9 in the vertical plane. You can see by default it'll be, I think, 1728 by 972 at 16 by 9, but at 3 by 2 we're going to be getting 1728 by 1152. So a bit more resolution if you choose 3 by 2. It's also important to know, because if you've got a slow card and you can't quite get continuous recording using 16:9 or 3 by 2, you can select a letterboxed format like 2.39:1 and it'll be recording less pixels and less data to the card. So you might actually get continuous recording that way if you're struggling. Now the third option we see on the list is bit depth. Had we installed the normal version of Magic Lantern on the website, we wouldn't actually see this as an option. But thanks to Dfort and his custom build, we have the ability to alter the bit depth here. So if we go into bit depth, we can see we've got 10, 12 and 14 bits available. Now the Canon 7D does actually have a 14-bit AD converter inside it, so you can harness all that 14 bits if you want to. But what I would recommend is pretty much just shooting it at 10-bit most of the time, because it's a sub 1080p camera and you don't have the highest dynamic range really as it is. I would say you're only going to get marginal benefits from choosing 12 or 14 bits. Maybe if you want to apply LUTs afterwards, or you want to work in log C format, maybe work in 12 bits, but 99% of the time I'm going on 10. So another change we want to make is the global draw settings. By default you can see it's set to off, and what that means is we can see here if we start recording, the Magic Lantern overlays will turn off, and I think this is to save on CPU resources, but really we want that on because it's very useful to be able to see your exposure and things like that. So global draw set to allow. And you should see now when we record we still have the overlay. And then finally we want to come down to preview options here, and you'll see that it's on auto, and I'll just show you what that does. So on live view, if we press Canon's magnifier button, usually it would bring up Canon's zoom, but actually by default we're sort of locked into this 5 times zoom, and it's not very useful at all. And it means we've got to go to photo mode and then back to video mode to go back to normal, so that's not very practical. So let's just change the preview option from auto to Canon, and that means that when we press the magnifier button it will still be smooth, and then we can press it again 10 times, and then if we press it again it will go back to normal. So that's really useful before you're shooting. If you want to change focus and you need really critical view, we can use this ×5 or ×10 magnifier. And you can customize this magnifier a little bit. So if we go back onto the trash can and then you find your preferences page, and then you'll see live view zoom tweaks. If we press OK on that, we can see zoom 5 times, zoom 10 times, and you can actually have just one of them disabled if you want. Below there we can also see increased sharp contrast. So I'm guessing it's going to show normal, but then if we press the magnifier it's going to actually add a tiny bit of sharpening to the screen. Might be useful again if you're just using it for a focus assist. So that's how I have the preview option set. Now you'll see there is a problem. If we start recording, we can no longer access the magnifier. So what I like to do is, if we press the trash can button again and we go to overlays, we've got an option here called magic zoom. So if you press OK you can turn on magic zoom, and what this is basically is a focus assist box that you can turn on while you're recording. So we'll start recording here, and if I half press the shutter button you can see it'll bring up a similar sort of focus box thing here, and it's a 2:1 magnification, and it's going to zoom in on whatever that point is that we can move around with the joystick. So that can be useful if you're recording, just to get your critical focus there. It's not quite as sharp and as good as Canon's ×5 and ×10 view, but at least you can use this while you're recording. So we're going to focus on the overlays menu a bit more here. And this is where you can customize what actually appears on your screen as you record. Now this is going to be subjective for everyone, but I'm going to put it on how I like it. I personally find the zebras are a little bit laggy and a little bit buggy, so I usually have the zebras turned off. And you can see here we have the histogram and the waveform on at the same time, so you've got 2 different meters telling you what exposure you're at. So personally I just kind of like to pick one of these. It's less resource heavy as well, so I think I'm just going to go with the waveform. So just a few last things. If we go into the Canon menu, you can see we've got video system and it's on PAL at the moment. So this is going to be how you customize your frame rate a little bit. So if we go to NTSC, you can see that we're now at 30 frames a second. And this can be useful if you're shooting outside and it's not playing havoc with your lights, because obviously I'm at 50 hertz in this country, but if you're in the US you will have a 60 hertz power supply, so that's going to work better with NTSC. Regardless, sometimes I do like to use 30 frames a second because it can look quite nice to crank down from 30 frames to 24 frames in your editor timeline, and you get just a touch of slow motion, and sometimes it's not even very obvious, but it can just look quite nice, especially when you've got handheld footage and you've got a few kind of jutters and shakes in the footage. Slowing down the footage slightly can sort that out for you. So that's how you can change that. And then if you press info, you get Canon screen, then you've got to press Q, and then you come down here, and that's how you kind of cycle through the different frame rates available depending on each video system you're using. So on NTSC you've got 24, 30 and 60, but at 60 frames a second it's going to be at a different resolution, and I'm not sure 60 frames a second actually works with RAW. We can give it a try. Okay, so it is rolling, but we're at a lower resolution, and you can see the camera icon has turned yellow. which means that we are pushing the limits of the card now. So there is potential that we're going to get a frame skip and it's going to stop. It's gone red there. So yeah, I'm not very hopeful using that. I wouldn't like to use that myself. There we go, frame skipped, stopping. So let's go back onto PAL. And this time we're going to be at 50 frames a second. Let's see if that holds up a bit better. Yep. So we can see we're still on the green camera icon there. So we're not running into any difficulties with the card. And that will probably shoot continuously. So yeah, we've covered PAL and NTSC. There's one more thing. When we turn off Magic Lantern, when we turn off the camera, even though the CF card light isn't bleeping, it can actually still be writing to the card for up to like 5 or 10 seconds afterwards. So make sure you leave it a good 5 seconds before opening that card door and taking out the compact flash card. If you do it too quickly, it can actually leave the camera in a sort of loop, and it can make the CPU get quite hot, and it will definitely drain your battery. So, you know, you'll go and edit your footage, come back an hour later, turn it on, and it will be completely dead. So usually what I like to do as a rule of thumb, if I'm taking the compact flash card out when I've got Magic Lantern installed, just cock the battery door as well and leave the battery half out, or just take it fully out. And then you know for sure you're not draining your battery and potentially heating up your camera when it's not needed. So lastly, we're going to need a little bit of software called MLV App, and this is like the middleman software that decodes the .mlv file that comes out of the camera and turns it into something readable like ProRes or Cinema DNG. So you just want to download that. There it is. It's a portable software, so you just have to extract that and then run it, and it'll open up like this. So then if we go into our CF card, you can see it'll be in the DCIM folder, and it'll be all these .mlvs. That's your footage. If you shoot something and it goes over 4 gigabytes, it'll have an accompanying file to that will be like a m.00 or something like that. You don't actually need to import those. If you just drag the .mlv in, it will find the m00 file and bring that with it. So now we've dragged the footage into the editor. I'm going to show you what I use to just get the footage to a good place, depending on what I'm doing with it. So the first thing we've got here is your in and your out points. It's fairly self-explanatory. So say I want the video to start there, get to the frame, click in, and then get to where you want it to end and press out. Or you can use Shift-I and Shift-O to do that as well. Okay, so those are your in and your out points. So we can change our debayering algorithm here, and basically debayering is where you have your red, your green, your blue filter in the sensor, and they're all separate, and debayering is basically where you have to combine those and make a full colour image, if that makes sense. I'm not an expert on it at all, but I think that's what it is. So depending on what debayering algorithm you choose, it's going to have a slightly different interpretation. And most of all, it makes most of the difference to like the texture of the image, really. So I mostly go with Bill Near because it's quite efficient. So your render times are going to be low. Your preview FPS might be smoother. But by using Bill Near, you might sometimes get like aliasing sort of artifacts and things like that, like you would in a video game. So if you get aliasing or moi problems, then maybe use Amaze, which looks a bit smoother sometimes. Those are really the only two I use. So now you've got your like standard raw editor controls, you know, your exposure, your contrast, your whatever, and you'll see because we're shooting in RAW, really got that control now over the dynamic range. We're not in Rec 709 anymore, baby. So this is a very powerful control. I will set my exposure in this app. I'm not going to wait to do it in the editor. This is where you want to be setting your things like exposure. You've got contrast as well. Don't usually touch that too much. We've got temperature controls here. Now this, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So back in the day with your, I imagine that if you're shooting with something like this in RAW, you want kind of a film look as such. And I'll say myself, I genuinely leave my temperature either on 5600, or if I'm inside and we're shooting under tungsten light, I'll put it on 3200. Very rarely will I color drop and put things in the middle somewhere. You know, maybe if I've got a mix of daylight and tungsten, I might put it on 4000 very occasionally. But yeah, for the majority of my use cases, I find that 5600 Kelvin, because that's all you could buy back in the day on film stocks, it'd be 56 or 32. So I think if I'm going to be kind of going after that film look philosophy, a big part of that is actually having your white balance set to what the film stocks would have been back in the day. And another little thing, I think cameras tend to be tuned to work best at kind of daylight, because that's most of what people will be taking pictures in is daylight. So if you leave it on daylight, you'll have less chroma noise and things like that than if you were pushing things to the extreme. And that's just my experience. This is an old sensor. All these things don't apply in every scenario, but that's my little philosophy with that. Tint, I will maybe affect a little bit if I notice that we've got magenta or green tint in the image. Most of the time, the 7D is actually really good for being neutral. So usually leave that on 0. You've got your clarity, your vibrance, saturation, that sort of thing. Dark strength can be quite useful as like a, you know, quick way of getting dark strength. You know, same thing with the light strength there. You can double click on any of these sliders, by the way, and return them to their default parameter. If we come down now, you've got your tone curve. That's useful for obvious reasons. You know, it's quite basic, but it does what it needs to do, and you can do it in every color. So if you want that kind of like split tone look, you can quite easily get that just by affecting different things here. And often I find that subtractive changes can look a bit more filmic and natural than doing additive changes. That's just my own thing there. So let's reset that. Profile preset, this is quite important. So if we're shooting in standard, it's going to be a little bit more SDR, if you like. The blacks and whites are going to clip. If you put it on tone mapped, it's going to try and save the highest and the darkest points in the image. You get a bit of a flatter look, but it's higher saturation and more detail is saved. And then on film, that's kind of like does what it says on the tin. Don't usually use this one a lot, but it seems to sort of flatten out the blacks and make them a little bit more grey, if you see what I mean. One of the options you have here is ARRI log C, and this is very useful to have. It's sort of like your digital negative, if you like. So it's in a logarithmic format, meaning you've got a wider gamut of white to black, all your colours. There's more information there than with Rec 709. So this is useful because if you render in log C, you kind of have more of a master image. You can do more to that image afterwards, whereas if you render it in Rec 709, it's going to be sort of clipped a little bit, and it's pretty much just for final delivery. So depending on your use case, Rec 709 can look amazing, and actually a lot of recent things I've done on the 7D is just been going straight to Rec 709 in MLV App using standard tone mapped or film and just rolling with that. But obviously, if you need that flexibility and you want to add LUTs in the editing process, then go with log C. So yeah, you'll see here if I put it on log C, it does take away like most of these controls that you've got here, and it'll be a more sort of base image. The only thing you can do is exposure and white balance there. If you have it on any of the other modes, you've got the full creative control. The last thing I might change, depending on how the footage looks, is the color science thing here. So you've got your camera matrix that it's usually using. If you set it to not use color science from the camera, you can see it takes on a slightly different hue. I find the camera matrix puts it slightly towards green, just ever so slightly, but then it can be quite pleasant. But these lean slightly more towards magenta. So it's really only if you've got quite extreme problems in the footage, like you've got a lot of clipping or a lot of underexposure, you know, sometimes this can help you out. Extreme white balances can be another thing where this might come in handy. But the last thing there, cyan highlight fix, I really don't notice this doing much. AGX. Again, I'd never really use this. So there you go. That's mostly what there is to it. You can actually import LUTs here. They've got to be a certain format, .cube. But yeah, you can put LUTs on the footage and then export it. But like I say, most of the time nowadays, I'm just going with tone mapped film, and I'll just export it like this. So that's MLV App, guys. We're gonna have just a tiny look at the export settings. So codec, you can use Apple ProRes if you know anything about those. I tend to stray away from using the lossless one or the compressed one. I kind of just go for 422 or 422 HQ. You've also got the option, if you want, of using Cinema DNG uncompressed or lossless there. That can sometimes be a bit more efficient for your computer to edit because they're just individual pictures rather than being in a container, in a codec. So you'll find that sometimes ProRes can be a bit more laggy, especially if you've got a Windows system, because it's an Apple product, you know. But I find ProRes is great for me because it's got that balance of file size and quality. So 422 HQ all day for me. Export audio, I have that checked for sync reasons. The debayer, you can change that and force it at the render stage if you want to force Bill Near or Amaze or whatever there. You can resize the footage, but I generally just do this in the editor. There's not too much of a reason to do it here. I'd rather keep the frame rate and the resolution and all that to what it was when it was captured. So you've got your master file, then drop it into the editor and you can do all this stuff. So there we go. Thanks for watching, guys. I think that's everything, and yeah, let me know if you want to see some more 7D content, and I'll happily serve it up. Cheers.